We'll talk a little bit more about why they misunderstood the landscape that they were starting to walk in. So we do this work because we put the person first. And when we talk about what makes this so special and why the path that Dying with Dignity Canada has forged is so important, we're really talking about medical assistance in dying as a fundamental new human right in Canada. It's one of the most important human rights developments in the last 50 years, and there are a lot of giants that we are walking in their footsteps to get to where we got to in Canada. We look to the same international mechanisms as other organizations and groups do when you're arguing for reproductive rights, when you're arguing for rights for health for people in the queer community. They look to the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, they look to the Covenant on Economic and Social and Cultural Rights, and in Canada, we look to a Charter of Rights and Freedoms. So I was at this conference in the fall of 2016. This is palliative care doctor on the panel I was speaking at. He wasn't really very supportive of assisted dying. And so I gave him my framework of this is what we do. We look at this from a human rights perspective. And he said to the audience, and the way he said it was so funny, "Oh, Dying with Dignity Canada, you're so clever, talking about human rights and medical assistance in dying. You want to talk about human rights? Let's talk about palliative care." So I asked him, why don't you? Why don't you talk about palliative care as a human right? Because spoiler alert, healthcare is a human right, which means palliative care is a human right, which means medical assistance in dying is a human right. Because when we focus on the person, in this case, that person who is so vulnerable and so frail, and we make them our North Star, I think all of the other things fall away, and we put forward a person-centered approach to people at the most vulnerable times of their lives. So this is the conversation I was having with this reporter, and I had this real aha moment because I realized that, and please don't take any offense here, but there are certain things, and I'll talk about it a little bit more tomorrow in my comments tomorrow morning, that gives Canada a little bit more room to work than I think other jurisdictions. So we're actually able to really try to push the envelope on the eligibility criteria. We're really able to push the envelope on some of the access issues because we have certain mechanisms that not everyone has, and I think that that's a little bit unfortunate. However, I think that Canada can certainly help inform, and as well, we have certainly a lot to learn from other jurisdictions that have assisted dying. So tomorrow I'll talk a little bit more about those socio-political, legal things that give us that sort of extra push that we're going to be able to really move things in the months and the years ahead. But what I realized in talking to this reporter is that as an organization, we are literally mapping out new territory that did not exist in our country, and I don't think has existed in other jurisdictions in quite the same way. The fall of 2016, a bioethicist said something to me that stuck with me for a very long time, and she said that everyone, the person, the family, the clinician, the healthcare teams, must all have a very high quality experience when it comes to assisted dying. And I thought, well, that's a really very profound thing to say, because when we're talking about the person, there are many people that are involved in the process towards an assisted death. So whether we advocate for fair compensation, for clinicians who assess and provide medical assistance in dying, or campaign for access in all publicly funded healthcare facilities in our country, we do it because if there's going to be a potential negative consequence on the person, or if there's something really good, we're going to let people know about it, we're going to advocate on it, we're going to campaign on it, and we're going to take legal challenges if that's what we have to do to move things forward. So, why did our organization think it was over? That's a question, as a human rights activist, I'm like, I don't understand. It's going to be litigated for years. There's going to be access issues all across the country. How can you not know? And it was during the summer of 2016, after the legislation passed in Canada, that I was having a discussion with one of my board members. And I was explaining why, as an organization, we should participate in a study that's sort of underway right now. And as an organization, sometimes you look at certain government studies and you tend to be a little bit skeptical, right? Is it just going to be studied and then it's going to get shelved? And so I tried to explain, no, as an organization, of course we can be skeptical. We know what happens with government studies. But for the person and the family and the people that participate in that, that is a very meaningful, important thing for them to do, and we have to show leadership by also enabling people and their voices to be heard in these kinds of consultations. And he said, I guess I've just never worked in professional human rights before. And I'm like, oh, you don't know, it's never over. It is never over. All I had to do was wait for the fall of 2016 to see what happened in this country to know it's never over, right? It was a very sad and harsh reality. So it's never over. I can't tell you, but like, I wish someone could bring me the human right that's over. Women's rights, rights for people in the queer community, rights for, for children, rights for First Nations people, the right to basic, healthy, clean drinking water. It's not over. And so, what we had in Canada in 2015 when the Supreme Court laid down the Carter decision, I like to use this analogy, is they unleashed a gigantic iceberg. Okay. And the thing, people always say, oh, it's moving at a glacial pace, it's moving so slow. Well, here's the thing. When you see an iceberg or a glacier in its natural environment with like lots of water and ice, what you can't tell is how fast it's moving until it shows up off the coast of Newfoundland, and then you ask yourself, how did that get there? And that's exactly what's happening in our country, and we think it's a wonderful thing. Dr. Green's going to have more information on the statistics and the data and what's happening in Canada, and I will say that we've seen, I think, a fairly, not for us surprising, but I think for certain administrators and policymakers across the country, a surprising amount of uptake in medical assistance in dying in Canada. But beyond the data, what does that really mean in human terms? And for us, it means that people, thousands of people, even with our very restrictive legislation, which I know you're all very jealous of, are going to be able to have their intolerable suffering relieved. And that is a very, very important thing. The other thing that the Carter decision gave us in Canada, and it's something that I like to tell people wherever I go because I think it's a really important thing to understand, is the Carter decision gave us a line. It gave us a line to stand at. And we're all now standing at that line. And I'm really proud that Dying with Dignity Canada stood at that line for 35 years out in the fringe of the wilderness, standing at a line that was imagined, but it was still aspirational because we knew, as all of you have known, we're always and have always been on the right side of history. And with any rights-based movement, there's a spectrum of actors. And there are going to be organizations like CAMA, the Canadian Association of Main Assessors and Providers. They're going to bring a lot of credibility and legitimacy to medical assistance in dying in our country, and I hope beyond. But there are going to be other actors that make us a little bit uncomfortable. And one that I think of in particular, and someone that I know, and I think many of you have heard his story, is that of Adam Meyer Clayton. He was a young man from Windsor, Ontario, suffered from mental illness. He wanted to die. And Adam was very vocal. He was often in the press. He was in touch with a number of doctors that we know. He wasn't able to access an assisted death. So Adam took his own life, and he took it Easter weekend last year. And I remember when we got the call, I was like, oh, it's a hard one, right? Young guy, handsome, so smart. But I remember, I think I did the first interview with the national newspaper after he died, and I was talking to the reporter, and I was telling her that I feel a little uncomfortable. This is a young, beautiful man, but his pain and his suffering is well documented. It's all over his Facebook page. He's posted many, many videos in the last couple of years before he died. But the real question is it okay to discriminate because we feel uncomfortable? Is it okay not to have conversations like this one supporter of ours, her husband had dementia, early onset, and she came to us last summer, the beginning of the summer. He was going to take his own life because he didn't want to die a horrible death. And her family initially was really supportive, but then he did take his own life by himself, as you often have to do in Canada for fear of implicating anyone else and aiding and abetting in your death. in your suicide, and it tore the family apart. They became very, very uncomfortable. And in fact, they became so uncomfortable that a few weeks before he was planned to take his own life, they had him admitted for 72 hours to a mental facility in Ontario. He wasn't depressed. He wasn't suicidal. He knew what was coming for him. So we really have to ask ourselves, as a society, do we have an appetite to justify the discrimination of people who have diagnoses like dementia, of people with severe mental illness, of mature minors who already have the capacity to make life-ending medical decisions of about their own lives when we're talking about medical assistance in dying? These are really sad and really hard stories, but I think we all have to look inward at our own discomfort, because I really believe that progress in assisted dying must come from a place of discomfort. That is where creativity comes from. That is where we see people rise to challenges, and that is where the original discussion in Canada on assisted dying came from. It came from a place of discomfort. Own the discomfort. We'll all be a little bit better for it. So, whether you all like it or not, whether you're doctors, lawyers, social workers, whether you think of yourself as a human rights activist or not, you're all standing there in that line with us. You're all helping us in the places where we have assisted dying to hold that line, and some of you are going to be very helpful in helping us move that line forward, and others, I hope we can help where they don't have jurisdictions, where we don't have assisted dying yet. But we have to keep the line that we have, and we have to build the spectrum of actors across the way so that we can all collectively move forward. Because there's just one thing I can absolutely 100% guarantee you. The people on the other side of the line. They were there before there was a line. They're never going to go away. They're all the people who have worked in anti-choice for decades. They are well-moneyed, they are well-organized, and they are very afraid, because fear is the currency that they trade and organize it. And it's our jobs to demystify that irrational fear and the great myths that are perpetuated when we talk about medical assistance in dying. And to focus the fear on the people who we really need to focus it on, that vulnerable suffering person, that person that doesn't have anyone to advocate for them, that person who's in some facility, doesn't have any friends or family, their fear of getting lost in the cracks. Fear is a real thing here, but let's keep it focused on the person. And so I'll just end by saying that, when I talk about this as a human right and what we're able to do in Canada, the thing that we always have to remember is a right is only a right if you have meaningful access to it. Otherwise, it's just something nice that we tell ourselves. And for people here in this audience that are from a jurisdiction where assisted dying isn't allowed, the other thing you should remember is human rights are indivisible and inalienable. You have them. They just haven't been realized yet. Thank you.